Hello, welcome to Mental Health Matters. I'm Barbara Myers. On today's show, we're going to be talking on mental health implications for people who are LGBT, that is, lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender. We're pleased and honored to have two guests to discuss this with us today. First, I'd like to introduce Karen Fokken, who is the mother of a son who is gay. She's active in parental support. Welcome, Karen.
Thank you.
Next, I'd like to introduce Dr. Caitlin Ryan, who is the director of the Family Acceptance Project at San Francisco State University, a project that does research on LGBT issues and helps families to accept their child who is gay, lesbian, bisexual, or transgender. Dr. Ryan's contribution to LGBT health and mental health has spanned more than 35 years through early community development, education policy, and research. She's won numerous research awards for her work, including most recently the Distinguished Scientific Contribution Award from the American Psychological Association. Her work has been presented throughout the U.S. and several other countries, and she's collaborating with many others to help an international movement of family acceptance to promote wellness and healthy futures for LGBT children, youth, and young adults. Welcome, Dr. Ryan.
Thank you, Barbara.
I'll start by observing that until 1973, being gay was classified as a mental illness in the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, or DSM, for diagnosing mental illnesses. This changed in 1973 because of a cultural shift away from the view of LGBT as a pathology and towards viewing it as a normal variant of human sexuality. And also the start of the gay liberation movement, which was happening around that time. And finally, that there were many people, including gay psychiatrists, who worked on very hard to get the DSM changed, and were able to do that in 1973. So a lot has changed since then, as we will discuss today. So Karen, I'd like to start by talking with you. I understand that you're the mother of a son who is gay. Mm-hmm. And can you tell us a little about your story, how you learned that he was gay and how your relationship with him and that kind of thing?
Sure. At that time, he did not come out until he was 23. I think that's changed over time, but most young gay people at the time didn't tell their parents until they were out of the house and in a safe place. We had not known that he was gay. We kind of suspected by that point. So it's strange to say, it wasn't a surprise, but it was, the reality of it was a shock. Mm-hmm. And he did not, unfortunately, I attended a church that was quite homophobic, and so he was fairly terrified to tell us. Mm-hmm. And he didn't tell us in person, he wrote a letter. Mm-hmm. And by that time, he had told everybody in the world but us. Oh. His sister had known for 3 years, and he swore her to secrecy that she would not let us know. Oh. So he called her before, he posted the letter, and then he called her and told her, and she was out of the house for some reason or other. She didn't want to be there when the letter arrived. So that's how we found out he was gay.
How was he as he grew up? I mean,
Well, we thought he was normal.
Yeah.
He, of course, we had kind of a shift in location. He was born in Germany, and we moved to California when he was 8. Mm-hmm. But he did okay in everything. He didn't like school, so he didn't do real well, but he did well enough. Mm-hmm. And he dated. Mm-hmm. And at the time, I didn't realize that Madonna was kind of an icon for people in the gay community, and he adored Madonna. So, there should have been clues along the way, but I was just ignorant of what they were. Yeah. So, for the most part, there was no indication for me that there was anything unusual about my son.
Mm-hmm. So how did you come from the time that he told you about being gay to the supportive advocate that you are right now?
Well, actually, Marcus was the one who suggested I go to PFLAG, and I had no clue.
Marcus is your son.
It's my son,
Yeah.
my gay son. I had no clue what PFLAG was,
Yeah.
and I was very apprehensive about it at the time, but he dragged me to a meeting, and I was just so grateful to see gay people around me, although we had gay friends, and were completely accepting, but for me, as I think for most parents, it's different having your own child tell you he or she is gay than somebody else connected to you. You don't have the feeling of responsibility you have for a child. But slowly through support and education at PFLAG meetings, I realized that, you know, there was a big need to get out and help these kids. The three main things are support for parents who are struggling with this new situation, and education for us and for the public about what it means to be gay and what gays really need, and advocacy to advance legislation and other areas where it's needed to help gays.
How's your son doing now?
He's fine. He became a hairdresser, and one of the things I have always regretted, before I had an inkling that he was gay, he came and said he wanted to go to beauty school and become a hairdresser, and I said, oh no, you don't want to do that. People will think you're gay. And years later, I apologized to him. I said, I'm so sorry that I said that. And he was so gracious. He said, Mom, I don't even remember it, but he's got a memory like an elephant, so I know he did. He was just being kind to me. But he has found his way to work in theater, and he does costumes, he does makeup, he does hair, and loves it. And he's in an environment that is just wonderful for him.
What would you tell other parents?
Everybody is different. Everybody reacts differently. And I think there's a lot of shock, of grief, because you think you know your own child, and then all of a sudden you discover this is not who I thought he or she was. And you just have to work your way through it. If you can find a support group like PFLAG, it's a huge help. But listen to your kid. I think that's something that every parent needs to know, and I was not always good at it. Listen to them, and you'll find out a lot about where they are and where you need to be.
Well, thank you. Now, I'd like to talk with Dr. Ryan about the work that you've done. Tell us about the Family Acceptance Project that you direct. What motivated you to do this kind of research?
It's a project that actually grew out of all the years that I've worked in the field. I'm a clinical social worker. I've worked on LGBT, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender health and mental health for 35 years. My clinical training is with children and adolescents. And what I had seen over all of those years was that no one had really studied in a systematic way what happens in families when young people come out or are found out during adolescence. So there were a lot of perceptions, many misperceptions about families. And I felt that it was absolutely critical to start a project that not only examined in terms of research what really happens in diverse families, but how do families adjust and adapt, and in particular, how do families express acceptance and rejection of their LGBT children, and how do those accepting and rejecting behaviors affect their health and mental health as young adults. So I started a project that is affiliated with San Francisco State, the Family Acceptance Project, that would not only do this basic research, but also would develop family interventions to help increase family support. I wouldn't say that we help families accept their LGBT children. We empower them to support their LGBT children, which is a bit of a different framework. The project also has an important education, public education and professional education component, as well as a public policy component. So what we've actually done is to do the first comprehensive study that was done all over California in coastal villages, urban centers, farm worker communities, rural areas, suburban, to understand what happens in families when kids come out during adolescence. How do they adjust and adapt? How do they respond? And how does that affect that young person's health and mental health? And the findings really are quite dramatic. They are absolutely what you would expect to find. But now that we've shown it with research, it really helps families understand that behaviors they thought were helping their children, such as trying to prevent them from learning who they are, preventing them from understanding their identity, from going, for example, to an LGBT support group, that these behaviors actually significantly increase their children's risk for substance abuse, suicide, depression, HIV, low self-esteem, and that actually helping their child understand their identity, providing support for them, assuring them that they love them, that even though they may disagree or be uncomfortable, that they're there for them. This actually really helps not only support that child, but to help keep the family together.
Karen said that her son came out when he was 23. Has that changed now? I think it's much younger now, right?
Well, the average age today, Barbara, that in our research, that adolescents know that they're lesbian, gay, or bisexual is about a little bit over age 13. And their parents find out about a year later. We've also found in our study that transgender youth were self-identifying around age 16, but we've certainly seen many of them coming out much younger now that they understand that there is such a thing as a transgender identity and that there are other young people like them. I think what sped this up dramatically is not only the emergence of LGBT youth support groups all over the country and gay straight alliances in schools, but especially the internet, so that young people and families can have access to information that just wasn't available before. And of course, there's been, a lot more research over the last
that's a
20, 30 years.
Talk to us about how you help youth to come out to their families.
Well, one of the prevailing myths that young people have, and it's all over, it's online, it's in their community groups, is that you can't come out to your family, that they won't be able to support you. And I guess I should say up front that about 80 to 90% of the families we work are families of color from all ethnic backgrounds, African American, Asian Pacific Islander, Latino, families from mixed racial and ethnic backgrounds, including very socially and religiously conservative families. They all love their children. They all want them to have a good life. They want them to be accepted by others. They want to keep their families together. So with adolescents, part of it is showing them what we've learned. One of the things I should say is that before we did this research, there was no real sense of what acceptance and rejection meant. And not only did we study and find accepting and rejecting behaviors, we found families who celebrated their LGBT children from when they very first came out. And we found that more than half of families are ambivalent, which means that with information and support, they can really learn to support their LGBT children, and pretty quickly. And because now so many young people are coming out during adolescence when they're living in their homes, it's really important for families to get accurate information and support to help their adolescent. And there's a great deal of misinformation about identity development, sexual orientation and gender identity development during childhood and adolescence. So helping adolescents understand that families can learn to support them, that they want them to be well and be healthy, and really help assure them that we'll be there with them to help their family work that through. We've found that in many families, it's not the same pattern that it was some decades ago, that we've actually had families who, from the very beginning, support. Is
Karen's family typical of the people that you work with?
Today, there are families from some ethnic backgrounds that tend to come out later. We've seen, for example, many Asian young people who are coming out in early adulthood. What we found with Anglo or Latino or even African American young people is that they're coming out at significantly younger ages and have been aware of this for some time. But of course, today there's so much more information in popular culture. There are so many more popular media figures that are open and out, and so it's a very, very different time. And I think the availability of information has a huge impact not only on young people but also on their family.
When you work with a family to try to get them to understand how best to support their child who is LGBT, what do you do when you're working with families?
First of all, we meet them where they are. We want to understand their experiences and what this is like for them and what their beliefs are and values. Secondly, we don't require them to choose between their child and their values, which I think has been the case for a long time. We help them hold those deeply held values in the context of love for their children. We don't believe that you have to give up deeply held values to love your child. In fact, we believe it's all part of the same value base and moral calculus, that families try to address all of these issues with. We live in a modern world where ambivalence is part of what we have to deal with all the time. So we help them understand that they can support their child even if they feel that this is wrong or not the right path for their child. We want at all costs to help keep that family together and to help them understand the behaviors that they thought were going to help their child, such as maybe physically trying to stop them from being who they are, reacting punitively, punishing them, trying to change their identity, telling them that they're ashamed of them, preventing them from learning about their identity, excluding them from family events and activities to try to correct their behavior. That this not only will not be able to change their sexual orientation or gender identity, but it instills a deep sense of shame and significantly erodes that young person's sense of self-worth and self-esteem. So in essence, those behaviors are really harmful and hurtful, and also are eroding the relationship between parent, caregiver, and child, or foster parent.
How do you go about teaching them? Do you have videos or classes or a lot of things?
We often do this work individually because we find that's more effective, because oftentimes people are uncomfortable. If the family is rejecting, they may be uncomfortable about these issues, and it's hard for them to talk about it. We really help them understand that what we've learned from our research is that there are behaviors that will really help promote their child's well-being and behaviors that significantly increase their risk. We do a little bit of family mapping in terms of how they're responding, what their goals are for their child. We help them understand that some of the behaviors that are happening in their family can be very risk promoting and show them graphically pictures of that. We work with families from all levels of literacy or educational levels. We have been developing family videos. I'm working hard to raise the funds to make more. These are very short. They're 10 to 15 minutes long. They show the journey of ethnically and religiously diverse families with LGBT children from struggle to support. Very few diverse families see themselves represented in the media. Usually when we see accepting families, they're white, they're more affluent, they have more access to resources. We don't see African American families and families from different faith traditions, or Asian American families, or even Latino families supporting those LGBT children. And families want to understand and know what families from their cultural background, their faith traditions are. How do they respond? What happens with them? So being able to show them these videos is an important part of the journey, connecting them with other families from their faith traditions and backgrounds, where they can just talk about this, where they can share, find support. We also help them with communication skills. We find that in rejecting families, very often there may be poor communication skills. They don't really know how to talk about this. They don't know what to say, or the reactions that they're having, which may be motivated by love, are coming across as criticism or rejection. So these are important. Enhancing communication skills, helping them in some instances. For example, we're doing family counseling or family therapy to get at some of the underlying issues that are really forcing that family apart.
Are these videos on your website?
We have one video on our website. We've actually been applying to a number of the mental health services to help us fund these videos. They aren't available anyplace else. They're really based on our research. So even though they tell these very powerful and moving stories of diverse families, embedded in them are these accepting and rejecting behaviors that we've measured. And so that anyone who views them can really get a sense of the change and the process of change and what helps that family change and what helped them make certain decisions that really are now promoting their child's well-being. I would like to say that what we're really doing with all of this is we're not just doing services or developing tools. We're actually creating a new research-based family support model here in the Bay Area by reaching out across, the whole Bay Area to serve families. We're documenting all of this. We're developing the protocols, the guidelines, the training materials. Eventually, we will disseminate this not only across California, but across the U.S., and there are groups in about 14 countries that follow our work. So they're already using some of the tools that are up on our webpage that we've developed and made available now.
There's a report entitled The Health of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, and Transgender People, Building a Foundation for Better Understanding. I understand it's just been released by the Institute of Medicine. And could you tell us about the significance of this report?
It's a very significant report. The Institute of Medicine is part of the National Academy of Sciences, which advises the public and the government agencies on critical matters of science and public health. I was on the scientific committee for the Institute of Medicine that worked on that report. It's actually a study of all of the research on LGBT health, and what it has done is to lay out across the life course the state of the science of LGBT health. What do we know? What don't we know? What are the areas of research that we urgently need more research on? It's very, very significant because even today, many people don't see LGBT health as a legitimate area of research inquiry. And historically, researchers who studied sexuality were discriminated against. That's only one small aspect of this. I think the most important outcome of this very, very important study is to change the landscape and to say that this is a very, very important area of inquiry. Government agencies should be funding this. Obviously, this isn't only for federal agencies. States use this, jurisdictions use it, other countries use it, and it really lays out the state of what we know now. And I think will put out for people some of the issues that they were misunderstanding or didn't really understand before they read it.
Can you talk about changes in people's lives that you've seen, some examples that you've seen because of this work?
Certainly. I'm thinking of one, it was an immigrant Latino family, a mom with a 16-year-old daughter, a little younger child in the home, and a stepfather. And once the mother realized that her daughter was a lesbian, she started fighting with her. There was a lot of family conflict. She wanted her to date a boy in the neighborhood. She told her this wasn't possible, that it wasn't acceptable. And so she sent her to live with her grandmother. And she didn't talk with her as much. There was a lot of distress. And so we did a session with the mom. She realized that her daughter had become increasingly withdrawn. So all of the findings from our study that rejecting behaviors contribute to high levels of depression, other kinds of outcomes such as low self-esteem and suicidal thoughts and attempts. And so the mother realized that all of these things had been happening with her daughter. And she was in tears. She was very distressed. And of course, we provided her with lots of information about support and how she could really help improve the relationship and offered to, talk with her and the daughter. I saw the daughter in the street a couple of weeks later, and she said, "I don't know what you did to my mother, but she's completely different." I said, "What do you mean?" And she said, "Well, she stopped making me date the boy. She started calling me every day and talking with me, really talking with me, asking me about my life. And she asked me about my girlfriend.
Wow.
So that's, I think, one dramatic example of how families can adjust behavior overnight. But I'm thinking of another family with a African-American family with a 12-year-old gender nonconforming child. And the mother and the grandmother loved to dress her up and made a beautiful dress for Easter. And the daughter became increasingly distressed and more withdrawn. And they learned from the school that the child was going to school and dressing up as a boy and using a boy's name. And so we did a family education session, and we learned that even though this was a family that lived in a community with great access to information about transgender people and laws in place, that this family had never heard of the word transgender. They didn't know what it was. They didn't understand that this was really their child's inner core sense of self, and what they thought was willfulness and disobedience and disrespect was actually this child really struggling to understand who they really were. So the whole educational piece to it had a really important impact in terms of helping that family understand that by behaviors that they thought were helping were actually very harmful. And of course, we got them counseling and support, and were able to help that family.
Very good. Well, thank you. There's some resources that I'd like to leave you with. Dr. Ryan's Family Acceptance Project is on the web. There are lots of different publications and videos and booklets and that kind of thing on the website, which will be very helpful to you. There's a report, The Health of Lesbian, Gay, Bisexual, Transgender People, Building a Foundation for Better Understanding, that's available on the Institute of Medicine website. Also, I'd like to talk about PFLAG, Families and Friends of Lesbians and Gays. There are 3 PFLAG in our area here. Fremont in the East Bay is one. Danville, San Ramon is one. And Oakland is one. I'd like to thank Karen for coming and talking about her story, and thank you, Dr. Ryan, for talking about your remarkable research that you've worked on. I'd like to close with these words from the Reverend Wayne Arneson. Take courage, friends. The way is often hard, the path is never clear, and the stakes are very high. Take courage. For deep down, there is another truth. You are not alone. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.